Right then, that's 1 minute past, so we'll make a start. I'm Kiana. I'm hosting the webinar today as part of the Farm Advisory Service. And today's webinar is on ecological focus areas in nature. And we're going to talk a little bit specifically about how it connects to greening, as that's quite relevant to us at the moment, obviously. This is our third webinar in the series, in our Women in Ag series. So the previous two are available on YouTube, so you can log in and watch them back retrospectively if you didn't manage to make it to the original one. This is all being run by the Farm Advisory Service, which is Scottish Government funded. So we need to thank them for funding this webinar for us today. We've got Lorna Cole speaking for us. She is a senior consultant at SAC, and she's usually based out of the Ayr region. And she's actually an agricultural ecologist, but a lot of the work she does is specifically around farms and sort of agricultural land.
Thank you, Kiana. So today I'm going to give you a brief overview of how some of the different EFAs benefit nature and water and climate benefits, and give some handy tips on how to increase their value through better management and design. So as an ecologist, I'm constantly wondering what nature's up to. Why are some bumblebees and sunflowers? Why do birds all congregate in that area of the field? And I really love my job because it helps me answer these questions. And through answering these questions, it allows us to start looking at how we can make some small changes to how we farm the land and help nature, and how that can in turn ensure that nature provides farms with benefits too. So I'm sure you'll be aware we're in the middle of a climate and biodiversity crisis. So the top stripes are the warming stripes. We can see our planet is gradually heating up, and the bottom stripes are like bird species, and we can see as we go from green to grey, we're losing bird species. And of course, climate and biodiversity, they interact. As we lose species, we become more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. I kind of like to think of biodiversity as our insurance policy. It helps us ensure we can respond to future environmental change, be it land use change, climate change, etc. So there's a number of drivers of biodiversity decline. So first we've got probably the most important driver in the UK is changes in land use. So we've seen urbanisation, so increased encroachment from towns and villages into the countryside. We've seen forestry change from native woodlands to commercial plantations, and we've seen more intensive agriculture. So that's increased use of agrochemicals. It's the loss of hedgerows as we've increased field size to make way for machinery, draining of fields to make them more productive, increased docking density, a whole wide array of different changes to how we farm. On top of this, we've got climate change. So that can impact on the quality of habitat. So what we're seeing is more periods of intense heat during the summer, and that can make the rivers heat up, impacting on species such as trout and salmon. We're also seeing species move northwards, and we don't really know what impact that will have as new species are introduced into ecosystems. So an example of this is we now see the ringlet butterfly quite frequently at our Curtin and Ochtertyre farm. We've got pollution from a wide range of sources: agriculture, forestry, road runoff, industry, and that can impact on soil health and water quality. And also some pollution is directly toxic to species. On top of this, we've got invasive non-native species. So these can outcompete our native species. So I'm sure some of you will see stands of Japanese knotweed or Himalayan balsam. They're very aggressive, very fast growing, and they'll take over and swamp out native species. Also, we've got red and grey squirrels. Not only do grey squirrels outcompete red squirrels, they also carry squirrel pox virus. So these non-native species can bring in new diseases as well. And finally, not such an issue now for Scotland is harvesting of food and fuel, like over harvesting. So we've got overfishing and peat extraction. The important thing is that these different pressures, they don't act alone. So species face a multitude of these pressures, intensifying the impact. So if we look at signal crayfish and salmon, so signal crayfish, they prey on the eggs of salmon and they can destroy spawning habitats. On top of this, as I mentioned, we've got warmer waters heating up. And then again, we've got pollution running off from agricultural land and roads and industries, etc. So salmon are struggling because of these multitude of pressures. So how is Scotland actually faring? Well, we've got data from the State of Nature Scotland report, and it indicates that across 407 species, we've seen a 15% decline since 1995. We've also got really good data in the UK for vascular plants, and in Scotland, we've seen a decline by about 14% since the 1970s. However, it's not all bad news. If we look, we can see a decline in upland birds, but farmland birds are actually increasing. Similarly, if we look at our insects, our natural enemies, so the species such as spiders, beetles, and ladybirds that help control pest populations, they're relatively stable. They fluctuate year on year, but no real increase or decrease. And pollinators in Scotland are actually on the increase. And the latest report indicated a 30% increase. What I find most interesting is the positive trends in farmland birds and pollinators are bucking the trends we see in the rest of the UK. And I think that's quite a good message for Scotland. Okay, we can improve, but it's demonstrating that what we're doing already is beginning to work. We don't know exactly what is driving these changes, but we think, for example, for insects, it's a combination of agri-environment schemes, it's implementation of ecological focus areas, local authorities starting to manage road verges and public parks for pollinators, and also warmer climates, that we're getting warmer, sunnier weather in the summer that the pollinators love. We've also in Scotland seen some huge successes. So freshwater insects, so that is insects such as dragonflies and damselflies, they've increased by over 300%. And that change is primarily been attributed to the implementation of the Water Framework Directive. So that demonstrates how change in policy can really help us combat declines in biodiversity. So this slide I really like. Ayrshire, that's my home county, if you like, and we can see in comparison to the Netherlands is a very simple landscape. These pictures are at the same scale, believe it or not. Netherlands are very, very intensive, very large field sizes, very little in the way of hedgerows or any semi-natural features, any woodlands, etc. Whereas Scotland, a much more diverse patchwork. We can see rivers wiggling through the countryside. We can see hedgerows. We can see farm woodlands. So I think this demonstrates what we still have in our Scottish landscapes. And I think we need to be proud of that. Some more specific examples, I would say I have never visited a farm yet that I've not found something that I've really loved. This is a water margin at Killoch Farm in Ayrshire. When we visited that margin in May, it was quite unremarkable. We came back in July and it was absolutely full of ringlet butterflies. Ringlet butterflies, their larvae feed on native grass species, so they're not very common in intensive dairy farms, but they exist in these wee pockets of semi-natural habitat. This is a flower-rich margin at Preston Hall Farm in Midlothian. The margin was absolutely teeming with insects, a huge diversity of clovers, vetches, wide array of different plant species. And here we've got Littleton Farm in Ayrshire. This is a low, well, in this case, a no-input grassland. They've not used agrochemicals for a long time. And we can see a huge diversity of plant species that are now there established in the swards. So ecological focus areas, well, these are under Tier 2 enhanced greening, and because they are non-competitive, because they're linked to your basic farm payment, we see huge uptake of these throughout Scotland. And that means these 11 options have huge potential for nature. The key aims are to benefit wildlife, to make farms more climate positive, both with respect to reducing emissions, but also increasing carbon capture and storage, to improve water quality and to restore soil health. So I'll go through, I won't go through every option because we'll be here all night, but I'll go through some of the options and some of the benefits that these options provide. So hedgerows, they are excellent for pollinators. If you think of a hedgerow in spring, it's full of fluffy white hawthorn, which is a great early season source of food for pollinators. They also have the kind of tussocky, grassy vegetation at the hedgerow base, which quite often will provide nesting sites. They also have lots of nooks and crannies which provide overwintering sites for natural enemies, so predators such as ladybirds and spiders. Of course, they capture carbon above and below ground. They're well known for their value for biodiversity. They provide nesting sites for birds, berries for birds and small mammals. They also act as superhighways. They connect habitats throughout our countryside. And that allows species to move freely and respond to environmental change, habitat change, and climate change. They can provide a windbreak, protecting soils, reducing erosion. Because of that, they'll reduce erosion, but they can also intercept pollutants as well. So through these two drivers, they protect our rivers from soil and soil-bound sediments. They enhance animal welfare, so they'll provide shade and shelter to livestock, and they also prevent nose-to-nose contact between farms, so they are great at enhancing biosecurity. Hedgerows, so that's hedgerows. So field margins, again, primarily targeted to benefit wildlife. Typically, field margins have flowers that flower slightly later than our hedgerows, so you're looking at them providing forage in summer and autumn for pollinators. They can provide nesting sites. If you've got grassy, tussocky field margins, they're great at providing overwintering habitat for spiders and ground beetles. The tussocky grass, it creates a kind of micro habitat, a microclimate that reduces the impact of frost and rain, etc. They can be good at storing carbon because you're not disturbing the soil, and they provide insect for birds and seeds for birds as well. If you place these margins next to rivers, so water margins, you can enhance the value even more. So you can physically exclude livestock from watercourses, and that reduces coming into contact with waterborne diseases such as cryptosporidium. Also, often in riverbanks, you get this kind of muddy habitat that supports the snail that liverfoot fluke live in. So it's an intermediate host of liver fluke. So if you can exclude the livestock from that, you exclude them coming into contact with these the snails that would carry liver fluke. And finally, they will create a barrier that intercepts pollutants. So the grass will trap sediments, it will slow the water flow entering the rivers, and it creates a physical buffer from infield practices. So just a bit of a bigger buffer if you're spraying. Green cover or cover crops. I don't know why the Scottish government call them green cover when everyone else seems to call them cover crops. But anyway, much the same. Primarily targeted at soils, so they protect the soil, they provide year-round food for the soil biology. The plant rooting system binds the soil, reducing the risk of erosion. Because you're not getting eroded soils, you're protecting your rivers from soil runoff, from sedimentation, and from soil-borne pollutants. So pollutants such as nitrates and phosphates can often be bound to soil particles. They can also act as a bit of a sponge over winter. If you've got any leftover nitrates, they will soak those up, reducing the risk of these nitrates entering into groundwater. And finally, they allow you to extend your growing season. So suddenly your plants are photosynthesizing and capturing carbon year round. Agroforestry, it has similar but slightly different benefits, some crossover between the benefits of hedgerows, but some unique benefits to itself. So the trees provide nesting sites for different species of birds, but also often birds of prey like to sit at the top of a tree. So if you look, you quite often will see buzzards perching at the top of the prey, and from that vantage point they can look for field voles, etc. They also can provide roosting sites for bats if they're older trees. They provide shade and shelter in a similar way to your hedgerows, above and below ground carbon capture. They can increase the rate water infiltrates into the ground and the storage capacity of a field, and that improves, regulates water flow, so it increases climate resilience and provides natural flood management. Because you've got increased water infiltration, you don't have the same runoff, which means you're reducing soil loss through runoff and protecting your rivers from from the soil and soil-bound pollutants. Agroforestry can provide food for pollinators, particularly if you have flowering trees. So trees such as crabapple and willow are really important for pollinators early in the season. You've also got elder as well, and rowan. Lots of different flowering trees will benefit pollinators. The nooks and crannies in the bark can provide overwintering sites for natural enemies such as ladybirds and hoverflies. And finally, we have low input grassland. So here, these often over time, low input grasslands will develop a diverse array of different native plant species, so native flowers, providing food for pollinators, particularly during summer and autumn. Because you're not inputting the same agrochemicals, you're reducing pollutants at source. You're restoring your natural soil biology, which in turn will enhance that natural nutrient cycling. You provide nesting sites for birds and foraging sites, be it a lot of different insects in these low input grasslands, or seeds from grasses, etc., that have not been as intensively grazed. And if you're lucky, you might see rare plants such as orchids starting to appear. These low input grasslands, the permanent grasslands, not only do they have a greater diversity of different roots, but they also tend to have deeper roots, and that can increase water infiltration into the soil and water storage. So again, providing resilience to climate change, helping you combat periods of both flooding and drought, which we're seeing increasingly often in Scotland. And finally, you've got carbon capture from the soil carbon, but also reduced inputs means reduced carbon greenhouse gas emissions. So legume-rich pastures, you can expect them to have similar benefits, although because these tend to be planted, you're less likely to see these rare plants such as orchids come through. So if we take action to benefit nature, nature will in turn benefit us. So healthy, good structured soil with good biology, high organic matter will be more effective at nutrient cycling. It will also be more effective at water infiltrating and holding on to that water. So some actions that can help that would be your green cover, low input grasslands, photosynthesis. If we think of photosynthesis as two things, first it's capturing the sun's energy, and second it's capturing carbon. So if you've got year-round plant cover, so green cover, that will allow you to capture the sun's energy throughout the year. And in an ideal world, what you want to do is either graze off or incorporate your cover crop into the soil, so you're keeping that carbon within the soil rather than burning it off with glyphosate. Also, you've got elements of turning what is effectively a 2D landscape into a 3D landscape. So suddenly you're not just capturing carbon at that level. You've got trees that are capturing carbon, hedgerows that are capturing carbon. So suddenly you're capturing carbon across a whole lot of different like 3D rather than 2D. And final, we've also got pest regulation. So you've got overwintering sites such as margins and hedgerows. A lot of our pest species such as hoverflies and parasitic wasps, they like open flowers. So flowers that have a very open structure. So if you think of flowers such as hawthorn, as buttercups. These are all good for hoverflies and parasitic wasps. So low input grasslands and hedgerows can be really useful for these open flowers. And finally, you've got pollination. So these ecological focus areas can provide nesting sites, so that could be agroforestry, it could be hedges. They also provide forage. So again, hedgerows, legumes, herb-rich pastures, and your low input grasslands. So a whole lot of benefits that can be provided by these habitats, and in turn nature will benefit the farm. It's not just about what habitats we have. There's huge opportunity to make these habitats better quality so they deliver more. On the left, we've got a left and top, we've got a typical Ayrshire hedge. You can see that hedge isn't in the best state. It's starting to degenerate at the bottom. There's big gaps. It's not going to do much for shelter for livestock, not much for biosecurity. It's got limited ability to store and capture carbon and restricted value to wildlife if you compare it with the hedge at the bottom. Particularly this hedge also has trees in it, giving even more value. So how do you try and enhance your hedgerow? If you try and avoid cutting it at the same height each year, if you cut at the same height each year, what you tend to get is these kind of grizzly scars forming at the top of the tree, of the hedge bush. I would say instead just increase the height inch by inch each couple of years. It's not a great idea just to stop cutting it, because every hedge wants to be a tree, and what you tend to get is just a length of tall, straggly trees, which isn't really what we want when we're talking about a hedgerow. Also, woody plants typically don't grow on first year, don't flower in first year growth. So what you want to do is not cut all the hedgerows. You want to cut every second year. And if you stagger that cutting, so you're only cutting half the hedgerows in a farm each year, that means some of the hedgerows are in flower each year. Eventually, hedgerows start to degenerate at the bottom. So you can see here, you've got old, snarly trunks, and eventually these hedgerows will die. So you can lay them. This one's probably beyond laying. The other thing you can do is coppice. That's where you're taking the hedge and cutting it right at the very, very base. And what happens there is the plant regrows, but it grows from the base out, and you've got new shoots rather than this old decaying tree trunk, if you like. I would say if you're coppicing, I would only do it in sections of a hedgerow each year and replant between areas. You don't want to just totally wipe out a hedgerow, so it's a kind of long-term game. Again, field margins. In the top, we have a very sparsely vegetated margin. It had quite a lot of thistles in it, so not great for production, not great for biodiversity. And we found no bees in that top margin. And in the bottom margin, in a similar, we measured 200 metres squared. We found 36 bees. So we can see how enhancing the quality of the margin can enhance the value of it to pollinators. What you want to do really depends on what outcomes you want to achieve. You could plant it with a bird cover, you could sow a flower mix, but also it's important to consider that tussocky, undisturbed grassy margins are important in their own right as well. So in an ideal world, having a mixture of all of these would be the best thing on a farm. I would say it's important that you consider your field margins. If you plant them, you consider it in the same way as you would your crops. So it may be that you might need to top it if weeds are getting ahead of the flowers you've planted. So a little bit of care and tender loving care during establishment. Try and avoid herbicide drift into the margins or fertiliser drifts, because that will destroy the broadleaf plants in the margins, so the wildflowers you're trying to promote. If you have bird cover, I would recommend that you're mowing late February, early March. That's before birds are nesting, but it also prolongs that period that the bird cover is providing seeds. Flower-rich margins, I would mow September to October, so allowing the plants in them to set seed before you mow them. So, does this actually work in the ground? Well, when I was at SRUC, we did a farm scale or 2 farm scale experiments, and what we did was we paired a farm undergoing environmental improvement. So this was Preston Hall, the HDB monitor farm just outside Pass Head, just outside Edinburgh, and we paired it with an adjacent farm that was undertaken business as usual, so our control farm, which was not changing at all during the period. And we monitored natural enemy predation rate. It's very difficult to actually know what these critters are doing in your fields. So what we did, we were a little bit mean. We stuck aphids onto little bits of card and we put these cards out in the field, and we counted how many of these aphids were eaten by the natural enemy. So here you can see an aphid munching its way through these aphids. And what we found is that compared with the baseline, both the monitor farm, so the farm undergoing environmental improvements, and the control farm, both increased the number of aphids eaten in the field. Now we found the same trend in the margin, but you guys want to see this trend in the field because it's not much value if they're eating all the aphids in the field margin in comparison to the field. We found that in the monitor farm, there was a far higher increase than in the control farm. So that demonstrated to us that these changes that were happening across that monitor farm, so that involved flower-rich field margins, hedgerow restoration, a whole wide range of interventions, cover crops, etc. It was enhancing not just the natural enemies, but it was making them do a better job for us. So it's important when you're looking at your ecological area, focus area, to think of the farm at the scale of that farm, not to think of a field or a margin scale. So if we look at pollinators, they will nest along hedgerows. The hedgerow also provides early season forage. They then might move to a nitrogen fixing crop such as field beans and vining peas around June, and then later into the flower-rich margin. So all these habitats are supporting the pollinators through the different stages of the season. Similarly, if we think of yellowhammers, again, yellowhammers will nest in hedgerows. They like to feed their chicks on insects during the breeding season, so these flower-rich margins will be great for that. And finally, during the winter, they feed on seeds, so your grassy field margins or bird cover crops will be beneficial to them then. So key to this is if you can maintain a diversity of different habitats on your farm, you're more likely to provide more resources for a wide range of insects and birds, etc. So key take-home messages are, firstly, well-managed habitats provide more resources and therefore benefit more species. If you can keep a diversity of different habitats, then firstly, you'll support more species again, but also you're more likely to provide everything that an individual species needs throughout its lifespan. So well-designed EFAs will benefit nature, they'll restore soil health, they'll reduce on-farm emissions, capture more carbon, and they'll build resilience to climate and economic change. So we've got 5 key actions for nature. There's more information in this, a technical note in this, in the FAS website, but you want to plan actions across your farm. So think where you're going to put your ecological focus areas and ensure that they're connected up. Think where you're going to put them, what habitats you're going to target. You want actions to improve soil health, so be that cover crops or be it low input grasslands. You want to enhance wildlife habitats, so to benefit, to manage them in the best way possible so you're getting the most benefits you can. You want to create new habitats where that's economically viable to do. So that might be taking some poor quality field margins out and replanting that with flower-rich field margins. And you want to ensure that you manage for species. So think of what a species need and provide those resources through the lifetime. I'd like to thank you all for your patience.
Thank you so much, Lorna. You've done a fantastic job speaking today, and you're obviously really, really knowledgeable about biodiversity in insects and birds. We've also got to thank the Scottish Government for funding the Farm Advisory Service, who organise these sorts of talks. And like I said earlier, if you're wanting some more in-depth advice on greening and some of the specific options, we do have specific webinars on that as well. And there's some webinars and live events specifically about greening coming up shortly as well. It's a very hot topic with IACS coming up and everybody needing to sort out the greening for 2026. Thank you so much, everybody. I'll finish there, but I hope you have a lovely evening.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.